discovered during the course of the week and thinking about this amazing idea of perception is that understanding and experiencing oneness, or that concept of unity, that feeling, and we sing that song, One with the One, to be able to get to that place of oneness, to be able to really understand oneness, is really what the basis of this teaching is all about. And so our success in using this teaching really depends on our perception and our ability to move from that place of separation to a place of oneness. So I want to share two stories with you, and I apologize to those who may have heard these, or at least one of them before, because I use this one particular story in most of my classes, and many of you have been in those classes. But the first one is told by Schopenhauer, and it's a classic. It's a classic story that's used in philosophy, in sociology, and now, of course, in spirituality, because it just resonates with what we believe. And it's the story of two policemen who are chasing a person who has committed a crime, and they're chasing this individual up a hill in Hawaii. And they chase the person up the hill and up the hill and up the hill until the person gets to the very, very top of the hill, and there's a cliff. And the policemen arrive at the cliff, and there's the person who has committed the crime, a horrible crime. This is a terrible, terrible thing that this individual has done. And of course, these policemen want to catch this person really badly. And of course, after all, he's a criminal. And so there's this, thing about, well, there's the criminal and it's us against him kind of thing. So you can get the gist of what the feeling is and what the emotions are that are happening here. Well, as soon as they get to the cliff and they get out of the car and they run to the edge of the cliff where the criminal is about to jump off the cliff. And in that moment, one of the policemen risks his own life and literally almost goes over the cliff with the criminal, but captures him and pulls him back to safety. He was so almost at the brink of his own destruction. And of course his partner tries to pull both of them back over the cliff. When asked why that policeman reached out for that criminal later on, as newspaper people were there and asking questions and so forth, the policeman said, in that moment, what I knew is that there was no separation between me and that other individual. I saw myself as that individual who was about to go over the edge of the cliff. I experienced a complete sense of oneness. True story. It's an amazing story. And that instant, that individual made that switch in his own mind from us and them to that moving into that place of knowing that there is no separation. Amazing perception. Amazing. So the other story is for those scientific types who might be in the room, where perhaps, suppose we were wanting to study fish. And first we would look at the anatomy of the fish. Then we would begin to understand the environment of the fish. We would find ourselves then studying the river. And then we would look at the weather and the chemical plant, perhaps, that was nearby affecting the environment of the fish. And this would all connect to the human economic situation. Now you see where I'm going with this is we're interdependent. We cannot separate ourselves from anyone or anything. It is a part of who and what we are. And the moment we separate ourselves, the less understanding we have of the complete situation. So the point is that we do not exist in a vacuum. We live in a state of interdependency, whether we believe it or not, whether we understand it in this moment or not, we do. And so in that light of spirituality, if we look at it from this perspective, from this spiritual community, if we look at both of these stories and this whole idea, what we realize is it's all God. It's all that divine energy, that magnificent essence of light and life. And it is about our ability to know and understand this concept of oneness. We are one. So Dr. Holmes says this, and thank you, Reverend Liza, for those great quotes. They were so right on and really gave us a basis for this whole idea. He says, the stuff out of which our human bodies are made is the same etheric substance from which all things are made. Okay? Then he goes on, he says, the one mind conceives all things from unity, which is the one back of all things, through the one law, which is the medium of all action, multiplicity is manifested. So even though we look at ourselves as perhaps having a different makeup than this podium here, or a chair, or the floor, or a tree in the woods, it is, in essence, from the biggest picture, it's the same etheric substance. We're all made of the same thing. And if we look at that from that bigger perspective, we can begin to understand that feeling, that essence of oneness. Yet, our logical mind has this real problem and perceives separation. Just as when they were chasing the criminal up the hill, there was definite separation. So let's look at this idea of perception. The way we perceive things is based on our own programming of what the world has taught us, and what that world has taught us and how we project on the world what we see. That's what we see. And so this human mind is a very tricky thing. It's very interesting. It does these amazing little things. It switches things around. For instance, did you know that your eyes really see everything upside down? But the mind flips everything right side up. But if you look at the refraction of an actual eye, you'll see that truly we should be seeing everything upside down. But the mind flips it around, just as the mind flips so many other things around. So the human mind changes it into a pattern that will fit our programming. Okay? It changes it to a pattern that will fit our programming. So if we saw things upside down, it wouldn't fit, would it? It would be strange and odd. So there's a conflict sometimes, a lot of the time I think, of when we see something, when we're taught something, when we're told something, we look at that and we say, this is not what I was taught. This is very different from what I was taught. And so as a result of that, we turn it around until it fits. It's like trying on a shoe in a store where you don't want to really confess to the person who's selling you shoes that you take a size 8 and he's giving you a 7. And so you try to stuff your foot into it to make it look good. It's that kind of thing. The mind fits whatever it is that's happening in the world to the way we are programmed to think, to the way that we have been imbued with either a consciousness or an idea or a pattern or a concept. It changes. And so when the logical mind chooses what it wants to see, and then it reports that to the brain. Now, when we see optical illusions, and as I mentioned, the eye, all of that reflect that. So our perception is the result of the reflection of our embedded beliefs of what fits. So think about that right now. Think about the things that go on in your life. Think about the way in which you want to fit something into the way that works for you. It's very apparent to me that the reason why teachings such as this do not grow by leaps and bounds as we would expect they would, because it makes so much sense, is because a lot of people in the world cannot retrain their minds to a different perception of reality. And so when they get up against that idea of oneness, it's rejected, and it becomes very difficult for them to embed it in their own belief system. So what happens is we have to eliminate the possibility of conflict, eliminate the possibility of unbelief. We have to retrain our perceptors to see beyond the programming of our past and to a place even deeper, to the voice of spirit, to the voice of source. We've literally got to change the way our eyes see the world. go back to the original statement, in order for this teaching to work for us, we have to understand, or at least be willing, to somehow accept this idea of oneness. Now, my guess is that most of us accept it to a certain point. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe not that far, but I can go this far. So it's a process, and it's a process of literally changing the way we perceive the world. So once we know the reason why we're feeling separate, what is causing that separation, the belief pattern perhaps that has been embedded in our consciousness, once we understand that and know that it is due to our perception and not to a real fact, we literally find it easier to shift the way that we see the world. So it's a matter of using the intellect, because this intellect is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful tool. We don't want to throw it out the window. We love logic. We love the logical mind. All of you A personalities will be really glad to hear that. We want to keep the intellect because it's very, very clear about being able to do certain things. That intellect can recognize something profound, and it can relay that to our consciousness and take that recognition to the deepest part of our being until we can feel it, until we can literally make that shift. So, Deepak Chopra is one of the masters of this idea of oneness. He's so clear, so good at his description of how to experience a state of oneness. And he calls it a state of ecstasy. Doesn't that sound good? A state of ecstasy. It makes you feel like, oh yeah. So ecstasy actually comes from the word ektosis. And ektosis means to step outside the world of space, time, and form. When we experience ektosis, we're stepping out of what the logical mind perceives as reality. We're stepping out of time, we're stepping out of space, we're stepping out of form, into a place of infinite possibility. Because there are no boundaries in that place. So we step into an experience that is boundless and eternal. Now it's hard for the mind that has been creating boxes for everything that we do. Time frames, day runners. Everything that we do in our lives is scheduled or placed in a box in some way. So can you imagine how difficult it is for the mind to go to that place of ektosis, beyond space and time, beyond the boundaries of all of that? It's a great challenge. And actually what he calls it is not just ecstasy, but sacred ecstasy. Because ecstasy, I guess it's a drug too, among other things, which, we're not going to go there. But, there are lots of other definitions of ecstasy, but he really identifies it as being sacred ecstasy. And it comes from a state when we establish a connection with all there is, when we establish a connection with that sense of oneness. Sacred ecstasy is exactly what that policeman experienced when he reached over the edge to grab that other individual. There was no boundary. There was no time. There was no space. There was no form either. There was simply the knowing that this life was my life, and my life was one life. And I must reach out for that life and bring it to safety. And that state of ecstasy is the place that we use in this teaching where healing takes place. Healing takes place in that place of sacred ecstasy. When we do a spiritual mind treatment or an affirmative prayer, as it's called, the practitioner will use 2 steps to actually convince the intellectual mind of the profound connection that we do have to this infinite reality. And so with those 2 steps, when we recognize the presence of this energy, this divine presence, that what we call God, what we call spirit, when we recognize that, all of a sudden the mind goes to a deep, profound place of inner knowing, where it knows something beyond what is simply the separation of us and the world. So where we do healing, there is no conflict. There is no judgment. There is no separation of any kind. When the healing happens, it is when that mind of the person doing treatment, that person, even if it's for yourself, you are in a place where you experience a sense of oneness, of infinite, eternal, boundless potential. This is that amazing realization that when that happens, there is nothing to be healed to begin with. It already was healed, and what we're doing is changing our perception of whatever that particular situation is. And the other thing we realize is that we already exist in a state of wholeness and spiritual perfection. Now, I'm very clear to say spiritual perfection because people have a difficult time saying, "Oh, I can't be perfect. I can't accept that. I can't understand how you can call things perfect." Well, in the human world, perfect is an idea that requires judgment. It's an idea that requires good and bad. In the world of spirit, in the world of boundless eternal energy, there is no judgment. It already is as perfect as whatever it is, will ever be. It is what it is, regardless of how we see it, how we perceive it. So if you perceive something through the eyes of that boundless eternal energy, if you perceive it with those eyes, you will see it that way. If you perceive it with eyes that have been trained to believe that it's wrong, bad, and upside down, that is how you will perceive it. And perception, dear friends, is the most powerful thing that we have in our operating system. It is the most powerful thing we have. As we change our perception, we change our reality. Being proven over and over again in science all over the place. When we change our perception, we change our reality. So someone once said, I don't know who, I just found this quote somewhere. If you can't see God in the rainbow, in the flower, or in every other human being, you won't find God in a book or in religion. You must be able to see that sense of divine reality. Whatever words work for you, that essence of spirit, that essence of God, to see that in everything, in every individual. Our perceptions arise out of the experiences that have evoked strong emotional attachments. So the reason we believe something is because it was emotionally, the emotional experience was very powerful at the time. So if we experience something with great emotion, that experience will continue to remain in our subconscious minds very strongly until we make the decision to let it go, to reprogramming it. And we can, and it's easy. Well, it's simple. It may not be easy, but it's always simple. It is a simple process. So we must provide the opportunity for those strong emotional feelings of love and joy and peace to replace the old ideas. Replace them with the concept of wholeness, the isness, the reality of what is. It's a pathway that takes us to that place of a new perception, of new eyes. So our perception of all people and situations is now seeing through different eyes. It's like changing the lens on the camera. It's like changing it from this gray filter or whatever it's filtering out to a clear vision of what is. As we change our perception, we change our reality, we change our experience, we change who we are, and we change the world. It is a most powerful idea. And so I want to close with a quote from Dr. Holmes today that is just so perfect, so clear. I missed one here before I get there. Sorry about that, I got carried away. So anyway, what happens is that our ability to see God in all things is the pathway to this essence of perception. And it is what Jesus meant when he said, pray without ceasing. So that what really happens is we begin to live our lives as a prayer. We begin to live in that feeling of knowing. When we do those first two steps of treatment, of recognition and unification, we create that sense of being in a state of prayer. So what if we were to simply live our lives in that state of being, of living, of praying without ceasing, of living in prayer without ceasing, simply being in a place of recognition of that source of all things in all people all the time? What a shift in consciousness that would be. And so our inner expression of love then comes outward as the outer expression of love. And we experience each of our unique personalities as a beautiful expression of that Godness, individualized. So Walt Whitman, in his experience of oneness, in his experience of sacred ecstasy, said this: I must not be awake now, for everything looks to me as it never did before. Or else, I'm awake for the first time, and all that was before was just a dream. And that's that amazing, it just made chills run up my spine, that's that incredible sensation of feeling that unity of all life. So our perceptions arise from experiences that come about when we change the way our inner eye, our inner belief sees the world. So now I'll close with this quote by Dr. Holmes, where he says, we are a point in universal consciousness, which is God. And God is our life, spirit, mind, and intelligence. We are not separated from life. Neither is it separated from us. But we are separate entities in it, individualized centers of God-centered awareness. That's who we are. That's the amazing perception of who we are and how we can experience the world. And so, just as there is amazing perception, you are